Hello everyone, welcome to the show. We have Miguel Encarnação, who's a Senior Vice President of Enterprise Data Analytics and the Head of Data Visualization at Regions Bank. Miguel spent over 20 years in technology innovation and leadership roles across industries such as ACT in educational assessment, Humana in health insurance, and the Fraunhofer Society in applied R&D. He's an expert in information visualization, AI, human-computer interaction, VR, and AR. He also serves as a professor of practice and adjunct lecturer of business analytics, innovation, and computer science. Welcome to the show, Miguel. Pleasure to have you on.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to be here.
You have a very interesting role as the head of data visualization, Miguel. What's your typical week at work like?
Since we're in a remote environment now, right, can skip over getting ready for work and commuting, but there is no typical week really. And the reason is data visualization is not well understood yet at Regions or most companies, I think. And so depending on the need, I'm doing a lot of evangelism, right, explaining to people what data visualization is or what it's not. But part of that, you can't just talk, you also have to show, right? So we're developing also a lot of visual interfaces for our data products and supporting them in that. And that is the best way of making people understand the difference actually between what they might have done in the past and what you're doing today or what you're trying to introduce today. And very often is actually the discussions that are going on in this product development effort that, where you have to explain to people why you want to change the way they are looking at information and at data, right? People get used to things, they get familiar with things, and it's always uncomfortable to change. And so a lot of this evangelism happens actually during the product development. And then there are other tasks and other work we're doing and bringing new tools and evaluating new tools that help people to do better visualizations for their purposes themselves. That helps them use visualization for different purposes, whether it is for communication and storytelling or for analytical purposes. And then also we are a very young team. I joined Regions in August of 2020, as we just discussed in the middle of the pandemic. And so just building this team was an interesting challenge for two reasons. One is there is not really the job description of a data visualization expert out. They often emerge from a different discipline, whether it be data science, where somebody is passionate about visualization, adds a lot of visualization skills, or they come actually from the visual design side, from computer graphics or so, and come from that side more on the communication side. And so it was very hard to find actually the right team members that can help me drive data visualization, literacy, and excellence throughout the company. And the other challenge was that around the talent that we were pursuing, we needed really people that are tool agnostic, right? Far too often you would be looking for somebody who supports a particular tool that a company uses, let's say Power BI or Tableau or Click, whatever it might be. But since we're trying to change that, we actually, while these are great skills to have, we actually have to look at people who are learners, who are willing to actually challenge what they have done in the past and evolve with our progress of data visualization at the company.
Yeah. You touched upon a lot of interesting points. One thing which stood out is the focus on visualization and simplifying the consumption of information. In many organizations, they usually bundle this with the business intelligence efforts or with, say, as part of analytics, and which is where a role of a leadership focus on data visualization, many organizations miss to do that. Can you give example of how this has helped Regions Bank, particularly in the last couple of years, how this focus has helped Miguel?
I wish I could, because we are still standing at the beginning, right? As I said, I just joined recently. The team was established recently. So our success stories are more of anecdotal nature at this point, I want to say. But you're completely right. Most companies don't differentiate data visualization or don't delineate with respect to data visualization for analytical purposes, where it helps the analysts, the data experts, to find better insight and more insight and quicker insight, right? Versus to communicate such findings then to the decision-making level, where it's really about translating these very complex analytical findings into something consumable and actionable. While you use the same visual primitives for that, it's line charts, bar charts, if you need to, pie charts, tree maps maybe, it's really very different how you approach it, how you have to design for it, right? Because you have audiences with different levels of technical aptitude, different levels of time to engage with the content, and it goes more than into really effective communication and storytelling, because you want it to be relevant, you want it to be interesting enough that people don't pull out their iPhones and start texting while you're presenting, that you keep their attention, and that it drives action really. And going back to your question, we had some success early on by just showing in some situations where data was discussed based on tables. That's what a lot of actually business people like to do, because all the information is there. They like to discuss things based on tables, to just introduce. So it was table about data, for example, where it was a progression of certain data elements from one stage to another. And so we quickly, if you want, suggested to use Sankey diagrams for them to show the flow. And people couldn't believe how much more they could see and how quicker they can not necessarily make decisions, but converge towards where decisions needed to be made. Because very often that's the biggest challenge, right? You can make a million decisions, but which ones are the urgent ones? And important ones to focus on. So that was, I think, one of the small anecdotal success stories, if you want. We have similar other things. So that's more on the communication side. We have a few where people are very much thinking on the analytical side about data visualization as that thing you do at the end of the process to report out on everything, and then that results in these convoluted dashboards where everything in the kitchen sink is in, and they're not very useful anymore. And by helping them create really more a design-centered approach to this dashboard design, and then use visualization throughout the analytical process to actually come up with the right questions to be asked, and introduce also the concept of exploratory visualization, not just reporting, and make people understand there's a difference, which then has also an implication on the tools to be used. Power BI is a great reporting tool, right? If you know what you want to report on and you have a mental model developed of how those various KPIs relate to each other. If you're exploring your data to come up with those KPIs and this mental model, Power BI might not be the right tool. You might have to use something like Tableau. And just making people have that conversation and understand the differences and start using that language is another little success story for me. A small step for me, a large step for regions.
Okay, yeah. Data visualization as a tool for communication, I think that's a great point. And you also talk about knowing what to communicate. And often people look at visualization as just dashboards. I hear this often in the industry. People just equate the two. And a lot of people equate visualization with data storytelling as well, though there is a distinction. So I would be curious to know how you distinguish these two terms, Miguel.
So I take a very engineering approach to that. So if you step back, first of all, why are we using data visualization in the first place? Right? Because it is the most effective sense that human beings have with the highest bandwidth, right? And so we're really using visualization to reduce the complexity of the data. And data is really, if you want, defined in terms of a language that machines use, right? Zeros and ones and numbers, etc. That's not consumable for humans that thinks in terms of patterns and relationships and those types of things. That's why we use visualization really as a translation of machine language into something consumable for human beings. And so if you think about that, it is a communication tool if you want, but you have a sender and you have a receiver. So on the receiving side is really about communication. On the sending side, if you want, it is about first creating the content, reducing the complexity. It is about analysis. But within these two categories, communication and analysis, you can envision a few subcategories, right? Communication, why are you communicating? You might communicate just to create awareness around something.
Okay.
Without the need for action. A lot of info charts are like that, right? It's just creating awareness around main numbers and KPIs and make it as consumable and engaging as possible. But there's no expectation that your audience does something with it. You just want them to know. And you want everyone to get the same message, right? But then on the communication side, you also have something like monitoring dashboards. Right. This is not about finding new insight. This is about quickly getting notified about deviations from the norm. You sit in a nuclear reactor, you want to know when the rods are overheating. This is not about drill down and analysis of why it's happening. This is about ringing the bell. Yeah. Communication, also just communication, but to take action.
Right, actionability, yeah, absolutely.
And then there is, if you want, the third category, I would imagine, on the communication side, we are still on the communication side, the reporting. So this is really communicating all the typically requested information and findings to a very knowledgeable audience that will take the time to actually read all that and digest it and discuss it, but to basically create starting point for major discussion, potentially decision making, but more likely for new requests for new information. And once again, it is initially just about communication, right? But it is about having just the right balance of overview and detail for everyone to create situational awareness and get onto the same page and have enough information to not just create awareness, but create understanding and trust into that information. Because if you think about an info charts and the few numbers you display to people with some pretty pictures in between, you create situational awareness, but no trust.
Yeah.
Because you can't look at the details behind it and you have to just believe the person that shows it to you.
Yeah.
So this is just the communication side. On the analytical side, you also, I want to say, have kind of three subcategories. You have one that is really, and you can align those with the different types of analytics, right? You have your typical dashboards for presenting descriptive information. That's what dashboards are for, right? So that you can look at your market level financials. And if you want to know a little bit higher level of granularity, you change the granularity really to drill down. You're not looking necessarily for new insights. It is more, again, situational awareness, right? But you have some analytical kind of capabilities. Then you have what I would call more diagnostic visualization. You need a very sophisticated interface with a lot of flexibility and a very knowledgeable user to answer the why question. So let's say with your dashboard, you came up, oh my God, we are losing money in, who knows, New England, or maybe let's use a state, Connecticut, right? Now comes the why question. And since you don't know what the drivers are, a dashboard does good because that would mean the drivers that somebody has already meant, right? So you need to look at the data from different sides in different ways and understand what the relationships are. A very knowledgeable person has to do that, and you need a very flexible interface. And similarly, exploratory data visualization, where you actually don't have a why question. You're doing it to come up with hypotheses. Right? This is if you want to avoid blind spots or if you want to look for new opportunities, right? Like which states are the best ones to move into because they have the right workforce and the right markets and who knows, the right climate, depending on what your business is, right? Again, you need somebody that is very knowledgeable about various potential influences. An interface that allows you to explore the data from different perspectives. And in addition, who can then distill it down to some hypothesis. And then you use other analytical methods, including AI or so, to actually predict right?
Yeah.
A move into this market might mean. Now, any of those more advanced flexible displays, once you have determined what you actually want to do, might then again result in a dashboard or in a communication artifact. Because you need to get buy-in, let's say, to pursue a new market. You have to tell the story, but not just, and that's interesting, not just the story of what you came up with, but also how you arrived at that. So you might, rather than just showing a screenshot of your final data visualization, you might have to show actually the various iterations you went through that led you to that visualization, which typically is also not something you do in when people just talk about data visualization in the context of reporting. So this was much more probably answer than you were looking for, but I see those two main categories and then in each of them these three subcategories when we talk about data visualization.
Yeah, I think you covered a lot of points, and some of the other questions I had, I'm glad you touched upon many of these. So you talked about the understanding and actionability, and connects back to decision making. If we look at how data visualization can enable decision making, I think you laid out the path, right? So that's one aspect. And the other thing, when you talked about the different types of analytics, that is also based on the user who's going to use the visualization. So you talked about answering the what question, the why question, and exploratory analytics for defining the hypothesis, which probably is targeted at a different kind of a user. So I think the takeaway, what I take away from this answer is in terms of deciding the purpose of the visualization, the user, and based on that, coming up with the right format, visuals, and all of that will follow. So now, if I get to the related question, Miguel, there is a lot of focus on data literacy. And you touched upon briefly on how you're driving this communication and how visualization can be a critical tool. Uh, is this part of your focus areas at Regions in your role, that driving visual analytics literacy at Regions Bank?
Absolutely. It's a huge part of my role because I can't just impose new techniques, technologies like data visualization onto people. They have to want it. In order to want it, they have to understand the value it creates for them, for what they're trying to do. So you said in your previous statement, it's about the purpose and then the user, and then we design for it. There's actually a piece missing, which what is the concrete task or number of tasks that user wants to be successful with or perform or execute on? Because the same user might need different types of products for different tasks, and you need to design differently for it. Far too often, based on limited time and resources, etc., do we think, or do people think they can create a single visualization product that covers all the users, right? And then they don't have to design it any further, do it ever again. And that's why we have this carnage of useless and underutilized, mostly dashboards in any company, right? Because it just was over designed for too many purposes, and any user looking at it now can't find themselves in there or their own task in there. And going back to your question, the literacy is just crucial for people to create that understanding. And that's why actually the group I'm part of is actually the data and analytics organization. And within that, we have other functions, among other also the data management and governance for the organization. And part of their charter is already data literacy. And we are collaborating with them to make data visualization part of the overall data literacy. And if you ask me, I'm a little biased with my background of decades in data visualization, but if you think about it, hundreds of years ago, only a few experts were able to read and write. And they had a certain power with that. And it took until the invention of the Gutenberg Bible, right, and the print for this to become democratized. But now it is a fundamental skill set that is expected from everyone. At those times, our communication was limited to, if you want, stories, sharing knowledge, right? Now we're all talking about creating insights from data, right? And communicating insights. And so in that space, everyone has to have minimal data and data visualization skills. for communication purposes and for analytical purposes. If data is presented to you and you do not know how to interpret a particular graph, then you're probably in the wrong position and you might make the wrong decisions and you might not get all the value out of all the data work that has happened before it was presented to you. So I see it really as a fundamental 21st century skill set to use data visualization for insight generation and communication purposes.
I think well put. We are all waiting for that Gutenberg moment for data literacy, where everyone can really use and interpret data and where everyone considers it to be important. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. And has the same understanding of it, of what it is and what it's good for.
Yeah. Another related challenge when you talk about literacy, related challenge is trust in data quality and trust in data. While a lot of people bucket this into data management, data thing, it's a much more fundamental problem. A lot of leaders I talk to, they lament about, particularly technology leaders, they lament about the low trust in users' trust in data within the organization. You touched upon earlier about data visualization and aspects of trust. But when the trust in data is low within an organization, can data visualization possibly take lead in helping that organization?
The short answer is no. So trust in data starts obviously on the data quality, on the data governance side, etc. And actually, it's even worse. With data visualization, you can actually hide some of the data quality issues that might exist. Okay, if you can lie with statistics, as the famous book said, you can even better lie with visualized statistics, right? The answer is, first of all, the direct answer to your question is no. However, if done right, data visualization can be a very effective tool to unearth, for example, the differences in data quality when you're interacting with the data. Think about currently, when you think about data visualization, you think about a scatter plot where each point looks equally valid. Even if you know that some of the data cases might be older than others. Some come from more reliable sources than others. All that information is there, but it's very hard to assess because we are looking already at far too much information. If you add now data quality information, then it becomes even more complex to look at. Data visualization can play a major role to actually put at the fingertips of the analyst an awareness of differences in data quality, and by doing so, increase the trust. I always recommend to people to have a healthy skepticism looking at any type of data, which means not to be too trustful, right? Too trusting in looking at data, because A, it is always incomplete. B, it has this variance of data quality across various data points, and is typically based on a model, which, as we know, all models are wrong and some are useful, right? It skews kind of your understanding of the underlying issue. The other thing I would like to say, more on the communication side than the analytical side, visualizing data the right way, especially if you make it an interactive visualization where you give the user some control of looking at the data in different ways, can increase the credibility and the trust of what you're presenting. Because whenever you present too much information at a user, they think you intentionally try to overwhelm them so that they turn off and just say yes to everything. If you present too little to them, they feel as if you have something hiding from them. So with visualization, you can present a lot of information in a very compact view, easy to consume, and with interaction, then even with some ways of inspecting the data, which is certainly conducive to building more trust and having more credibility from a data generation perspective.
Yep. I think that's great. You talked about models, and earlier you touched upon analytics, descriptive diagnostic analytics. Let's talk about predictive analytics and AI. When it comes to AI, people usually talk a lot about algorithms, accuracy, and stuff like that. How can data visualization help organizations that are adopting AI? And what should leaders know about the intersection between data visualization and AI, Miguel?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's actually great that you asked. It's a hot topic these days, right? The aspect of ethics in AI, explainability of AI, making machine learning understandable, And the interesting aspect of it is all that is geared towards non-technical users, right? It's for regulators, it's for decision makers, right? And so there has to be a translation of this complex stuff that's going on in the black box called AI to what it actually does that is understandable from a non-technical perspective. And there's a whole research field now called explainable AI. And within that, there's actually a research field called visualization for explainable AI. What are effective means of actually visualizing what's going on in the black box called AI or machine learning or so? And not just from a perspective of all the data that's flowing through, but also where we know about data quality implications, where we know about bias. How can we visualize bias there, right? There's even some research going on, not just for this purpose, but how to visualize analyst bias to the analysts themselves so that they can change how they analyze the data based on knowing that they have applied apparently some bias in just looking at certain data points and not others. If you then display to them the data points they might have missed so far, they can still decide, I know these data points are not relevant, therefore I intentionally skip them. Or, oh my God, maybe I should look at those data points as well because I unintentionally applied a bias here. So visualization, once again, if you want, unearths issues that are previously hidden in a very consumable way to help us understand very complex issues, whether it is on the AI side, machine learning side, or whether it is on just analyzing things, right? So that is where visualization can help AI. But there's also a lot of activity going on to embed AI in visualization. There are a lot of tools nowadays, the traditional tools from visualization platforms have now a way when you're looking at a visualization, let's say you see an outlier or you see a trend, the system knows a lot about this data, which is currently hidden from you. So you can hit a button and it explains to you then, based on their AI backend, of where that outlier is coming from.
Okay.
Or if you do a forecasting, you have a forecasting model and you would like to understand why it looks this way and not this way, or what the difference between two models is, it can then produce that information to you. So this integration actually of AI and visualization goes both ways, to the benefit of better understanding the visualization or better understanding the AI.
Okay, I love it. I think these are great examples. Let's talk about the latest trends and a little bit looking into the future of data visualization, Miguel. You are an expert in human-computer interaction. What are some latest trends at the intersection of data visualization and HCI? And where do you see this going?
Yeah, it's actually related to several things I already talked about. So these two areas were never independent, if you want, right? Because in the word human computer interaction, you see already it's about how do we make computing systems work better for the human. As we have already established, our main sense of consuming information is the visual system, right? And therefore, human-computer interaction always had a huge emphasis on how we visualize information. And a lot of advances in visualization come actually from the human-computer interaction field. So that's, if you want, one statement. Some newer, again, research areas or trend. I don't know if I should call them trend. Trend is always which area has adopted it already, right? There's a lot going on in research that I see could be very valid for businesses very soon. On the other hand, there are many trends that I'm seeing now on their third or fourth wave, like augmented reality or virtual reality, which I know will still not make it into the business, into certain businesses because there's a lot of hype associated with it, right? One trend is because of the human and human computer interaction, there's actually from within that community this new area that is being explored called human-centered AI. It's very much not exclusively, but one major aspect is this visualization for explainable AI. But the whole purpose is how can we as humans better understand AI in order to better design AI, in order to better control AI, and avoid those end videos that we have seen in many movies, right? And be aware of biases, etc. And what's interesting is you might know actually that the godfather of information visualization is Ben Schneiderman, one from University of Maryland in Baltimore. And he is now also the lead on human-centered AI and just wrote a book about it under the same title. So there you see how kind of researchers in this area shift their focus now onto the most pressing issues of society.
Okay.
Another trend is certainly, it's coming up now also, this collaboration in virtual spaces, let's call metaverse. I'm still not sold on that. It has certain marketing applications. It always has educational and training applications. But for the space where we are in, that I'm in, information visualization, which is about abstract information, that more often than not you shouldn't visualize in 3D. These environments have very little applicability, right? Then we have virtual reality. Once again, virtual reality benefits from visualizing something that is inherently 3D, like the real world or Mars or the subatomic level of our human body or something. If you don't have that 3D correspondence, VR doesn't make a lot of sense because you more often than not have more than 3 dimensions, and adding that somehow creates more confusion than it creates benefits. It's also a very isolated process. In VR, you are shut off from other people. They have to join you then as avatars, and suddenly collaboration is made harder. And in information visualization, we want to collaborate between various different stakeholders of the process. Then you have augmented reality, where you overlay basically additional information onto your view of the real world. Once again, you need something that is related to the real world, right? There are very few applications, at least in my industry, which is banking, where you would overlay the information you're looking at by looking at something. There are some application scenarios like in manufacturing, remote maintenance or so. You're looking at a machine and it overlays to you exactly the instructions of how to maintain it or fix it. I see that as an application. Or medicine, where you're guiding a surgeon into difficult procedures, potentially remotely. But that is really, again, something that has a real world or 3D dataset environment as a reference point. The closest that we come to in our industry is often if we overlay something onto geospatial visualizations. If there's some reference to location, then you might be able to do something. But again, those trends, if you want, don't make that much sense, at least in the industries that I have been working with and that I'm currently also in. There is.
Yeah, perhaps these are all early stages in research. They look exciting, but I get your point. They're not very practical. They don't have practical business.
Well, I wish, but R is already on its third wave. VR probably on its fifth wave. And a lot of people throw money at it because they think, like cryptocurrency, that it is that's just around the corner and will change the world. And I just want to correct that here, if you want. There are other trends that are a little bit more down to earth, where natural language interfaces, for example, also to visualization system. Often we have non-technical users, and they might just want to say, you know what, show me profit over loss for our markets on a map.
Yeah.
They don't want to figure out how to push the buttons to make that happen. And those natural language interface, most visualization platforms nowadays have such a natural language interface. Very interesting. A lot of those visualization platforms also add now features around storytelling, so that you don't just report, that you don't just have a screenshot at the end, but you actually walk people through the process. Some actually start to have cartoonish type of narrators that make even the narration that typically either a human narrator has to give, or you have far too much text on your PowerPoint slide that describes everything, that makes it more consumable, maybe creates a little bit more empathy, create a little bit more relatedness. So it's very exciting that a lot of those visualization platforms also nowadays add those features. I know, for example, Tableau they had a strategic relationship with Narrative Science, and now also Narrative Science was acquired by Salesforce, which is the mother company of Tableau since a few years. So there is a lot of that type of convergence going on, which is related to just making it easier to use data visualization and taking the complexity of visual design out of the equation.
Okay, yeah. I think these are exciting and down to the earth trends we are already seeing the benefits from. Yeah. Final question, Miguel, if there's one message or a recommendation you would like to share with chief data officers. what would that be?
First one is make sure you have a head of data visualization because it is really so important, right? Imagine a world without effective data visualization. All the investments you're putting into analyzing data and creating insights goes out the window. It's not a surprise. There's this interesting study out there that despite all this investment in AI and data analytics, only 23% of executives think their companies are data driven, and even less think that they themselves have any way of making decisions based on data. Those numbers actually went down by 10 points over the last 4 years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so what's interesting is that means despite all this investment, we are missing something. We are missing the translation of data investment into decision-making value. And that's the sweet spot of data visualization. That's what it's all about. And so just keeping it as, if you want, a little bit an appendicitis of data analytics at the end somewhere, optional if you need it, it's just a missed opportunity. So that's really the message for all chief data officers or any decision makers in an industry that needs to make decisions based on data. Put an emphasis on data visualization for communication as well as analysis.
Yeah, that's a great message. Yeah. Thank you. It's been a fantastic conversation. Thanks for all the insights. I'm sure the audience found it insightful. If the audience wants to reach you, what are some good channels to get in touch with you?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me there. I'm the guy with a complicated name, but I'm also working at Regions and Ganes. I don't know if you have a way to share my email address. Feel free to do. I'm an evangelist of data visualization because it still needs evangelism, right? And so I'm happy for everyone who wants to help me with that or wants to be inspired by me or just has questions. So I'm an educator at heart and happy to help.
Sure, absolutely. We'll include the links at the bottom of the podcast episode, Miguel.
Wonderful.
Thanks again. Thanks for joining in. And thank you, Miguel.
Thanks for having me.